just grabbed up my number 1 piston. Remember, I marked them on top. That dot means it goes towards the front of the block. I am going to throw my oil rings on right now, and I'll show you that. That's your oil ring. The directions even tell you this gap, those pointers will point at the top of the block. So that is the top. Nothing to it. You got to be sure that gap is not overlapped somehow. I've seen a lot of people somehow overlap them. Well, I say a lot. Apparently there's been someone in the history of the world that's overlapped that like a dipstick, and when you go to beat it into the block, it probably just breaks that ring off. So don't do that. Let's set it up here. You'll need 2 oil rings. Go with it. They're very thin. And the directions say go 1 inch to one side and 1 inch to the other. I always just go, you know, as far as I need to. If I leave that gap on my mark there, it should be fine. Kind of roll them on. Roll them on. Try the bottom one first. About to throw the gloves away. I don't normally wear gloves. Almost there. Alright, that one's on the top. So if you find our gap again, the gap was here, the oil ring's here. That's fine. I think they just tell you the 1 inch rule so that you can kind of keep it oriented in your brain. There it is. So there's my gap. There's this ring gap. There's that one. I might even space them a little bit further, just to be sure they don't rotate later. 2 ring has the dot. The dot always goes up. See if I can't go ahead and roll her on. See, it's going to try to fall in that hole. Just skip past it. Push her around. There we are. Remember my mark from earlier? That was what I was trying to, one of my tips in the last video. Just go ahead and line that gap up with it. Whenever I compress that, it'll be plenty close enough. And on number 1, you'll remember number 1 didn't have a dot either side. So there, I actually looked real close on it. There's not a bevel. And number 1 will go here. They make a tool for this. You don't have to actually have one to build a motor. I'm not a butterfingers today. Maybe I can set it on the edge of that. Come on over. There we are. That'll be with that gap. That gap will be with that line. I can see it real quick. When I grab my compressor, throw it on, it won't take me but just a second. Then I can pop that into the number 1 side. I'll go ahead and get all my piston rings on my pistons, and then I'll play with my rods. I have not fitted any more rings yet, because I don't want to get them out of order. Like, I can go ahead and pull all my number 2s out, leave them on the number 2 stack, all my number 1s out, leave them on the stack. Here's something else you can check. I'll try to bring the camera in for this. if you're worried about your bore being out of square, out of line, let's move that crank for now. That's fine. You can take one of your rings, go ahead and fit it. Well, we just did number 2. I'll throw it in number 1, doesn't matter. This is just for explaining purposes here. So we drop it to right there. Check it. It is 20 thousandths. Take our piston, go further. We can even go to the end of the skirt this time. That'll drop it exactly even right there. So now it's halfway down the bore. Take my same 20 thousandths. It should be very, very close, if not exactly the same. And it is. If you want to go a little further, you can. Remember, this is only going to go 4 inches. I'm sorry, 3.58 inches. This is just a stock stroke. Drop it to there, which is deeper than the crankshaft will put it, but I can still check it. Still exact. Good to go. I don't have any doubt in my mind about this block, because Rick Seaman has honed it for me, and he knows what he's doing. So I'll be back in just a second. I'm gonna get these rings popped on, then we can start working on some pistons. Alright, we're getting close. I got all my rings put on my pistons. They're all oriented correctly still using my marks like I talked about. And now I'm getting ready to throw in some rod bearings. Typically, I go ahead, I've got my brake cleaner, I know, like I enjoy doing, I wipe the surface underneath every bearing. I'll wipe these edges where the cap goes together, be sure there's no trash in it, right? Couple good times. If you feel the rag catch on something, stop, check it out. Don't assume anything, right? There we are. Grab my bearing half. If you look on the back of it, it'll say 10 thousandths, right? We check that. Starting our notch side first. Rolling it around. I got a lot of flack about my screwdriver trick the other day, but if it works for you, use it. They actually look pretty good. These smaller bearings roll in pretty nicely. There we are. It's in the cap. 10 thousandths. And we stick it in our rod. Starting here. Pushing down. Yeah, it won't need a screwdriver on this one. So I'll go ahead and put just a little dab. See my assembly lube still stringy, nice. I'll put a little dab on there so I don't forget. Smear it. Look at that. That's what Lucas will do for you. Tacky, nice. I'm gonna do this half just to be sure. It's gonna sit on the bench for a second. I'm still using the same tip as last time, telling you don't scratch the hell out of your bearings, right? I'll leave that rag try to keep a different rag for my hands versus a rag for my bearings versus a rag for my rods. Just a little bit neater, cleaner. So I've got that. I get my nuts ready for my, I'll even inspect the nuts some. Give them a quick wipe. These are stock. We're using the stock stuff. You can, if you feel okay about it. Some people don't like to gamble. I don't really mind. Doing our number one first. So, see if you can see down that bore. There's our main journals. Once again, I went ahead and re-wiped those again today. And this is my assembly lube. So I'll just stick my light here for a second. It's fine. I can drizzle this from the top like that. No problem at all. If it drips into the floor, I've lubed the floor. There we go. So after I do that, I can spin it around, catch it with my fingertips. Can't have too much lube in this process, anyway. There we are. So now I'm rotating the throw of the crank away from me, right? I actually go, let's see if you can see it. I'll go away and then plus some. That way when I'm knocking my rod in, I can have my hand here to catch the end of that rod. And I get up to a certain point, I'll move my crank around and let it catch itself. So, check my rings. That ring's still good. That ring's still good. You can even find your overlap. There it is. So it is not, I'm sorry, the oil ring, so it is not overlapped. Okay. And I'll get my ring compressor ready. So you'll notice one side has tits on it. The tits will go down like that. So when this compresses, it be more uniform. Come on, tighten it. There it goes. This is sharp. Don't, if you get your thumb under it or something while you're tapping, it will cut you. But I'm getting pretty close there. I'll show you how to do that. Well, let's see. So I've got my setups kind of in the way here. It's fine. You'll remember my rotella from the other day. That's why I stuck this cup in here for just a second. All that is motor oil. Told y'all not to do this. So, taking my rotella and just dumping over the rings a little bit. Not a lot. That'll work. Give them a quick smear around. See that ring spin? Don't want that. Keep them oriented. Smear a little on the skirts. So this is just straight oil. That's not my engine lube. Usually if I'm sticking pistons in, I'll just use oil. Skirts are good. Wipe my hand off just a second. So I know that's going down. I'll go ahead and wrap this. Check my rings one more time. There's that gap. Pretty close. Good. I'm not overlapped. Now, here we are. And I'll grab my tool. Start tightening that. Got a long way to go. Typically, let me pull that back off just a second. Typically, I will line this part of my compressor up with that part of the piston. So it lets this part start into the block, both sides, and then you'll see in just a second when I tap it. I'll set that there for a minute. So you see I got some skirt hanging out on both sides. My valve reliefs go up. I can just set that in for now. I'll move this out of the way. And I have already oiled that hole for the... I've already oiled the cylinder with a rag. Trusty stubby hammer. I reach through, and let me see. I'll have to move y'all back just a little. Well, I'm going to leave the camera there so you can see it. My throw's out of the way. Here we are. So we're getting there. I like to tap all the way around the edge of this to be sure that's even, right? The ring compressor is even itself. I can still see the rod bolts are far away from the crank journal. Getting closer now. That's it. Number one is in. So you can see my throw here. See my bolt. It almost got the journal, but it didn't. And it's easier to be more careful when the camera's back out of the way. So I've got this now. You can actually get some rubber fuel line if you're scared. Put it on your rod bolt sticking out. I'm not scared. It'll be alright. Remember, number one goes toward the front. We are there. Keep our flashlight handy. Rotate it up, have a look. So that's pushed up onto the journal surface. Just hang that light around up there. Get my cap ready. I've already lubed it. Get my nuts ready. So you remember earlier, oh look, there's a dot. I kept it kind of dummy proof for me, right? See, those are there. Cap's still good. Notch to notch. There we are. Start these rods. Nuts. If you know what you're doing, you can do this. If you don't know what you're doing, don't do this. This is all I'm doing is snugging these. That is it. Shortly, when I come back, I'm going to torque this down 45 foot-pounds. But I'll go ahead and do, you see that rod float? I pulled it there, and it moved on its own. It does that inside the piston freely, which is nice. That means there's lube there and there's lube there. Look at there, it turns over. Isn't that nice? Keep it going. When you buy a new crank, which this is actually a reconditioned crank, it doesn't come with a keyway, so you gotta have that. You stare at your keyway. I've checked this before. It's exactly the same. There's no front or back. You can kind of look at it if you want to, see if it's worn or anything, but you can go there, little tap. Now we move on to number two. Valve release will go up. And start my skirt. Always tap the top of that. Come around, come around, come around. See it? Got it? Still nice and clear. There we are. set any engine parts on the ground. It's kind of a no-no. The ground is dirty. But I guess for your 350 Chevrolet you can do that. There we are. Look at our bearing. Bearing looks good. Lubed. Find our notch. Find our notch. They should line up. That puts my dot toward the front also, which means everything's lovely. That's it. How's it feel? Like a brand new motor. Very nice. Alright. Alright, pistons are in. I told you I was going to try to measure what's the depth of that piston into my bore. So it's not very much. This block hasn't been decked or anything. I would recommend decking your block if you can afford it. But I've actually, that I remember, never had one decked, and I've gotten along just fine my entire life. So I've got this piece of channel iron sitting on here. It's kind of going across. It's pretty solid in that same spot. And I put a mark right there with a black magic marker, just to be sure that I'm going to measure that thickness in just a second. So now I'll take my calipers and I'll just open them up. We know this is probably about 1 inch thick. And place it right at the mark. I'll even do it where you can see it. I don't need to right now. And then I bring that down to where it touches that metal, and that should get us pretty close. Within a couple thousandths. So 1 inch 22 thousandths. So now I'm gonna do is pick this up and measure this. I'll just set it there for now. My workbench of a motor. And that is measuring 1 5 thousandths. So 22 thousandths minus 5 thousandths, 17 thousandths. So roughly 17 thousandths how far that's down in the hole, which is pretty good. I'll put up my compression calculator in just a second. You can see it. But the original pistons that came out of this block were 120 thousandths in the hole, doing it just like this. So quite a bit of difference. Summit's compression calculator, and I've got it plugged in. They want your bore, 4060, stroke, 358. This is your cylinder head CC. So these are, online it says 66 to 72 and a half. 5 is the dome or dish. So these have the valve reliefs. So that means they are dished 5 cc's. The 17 thousandths is the deck clearance. We just checked that. And head gasket thickness, I'm just using the blue Felpro gaskets. It's 45 thousandths. 8 cylinders gives me a 9.38 to 1 compression ratio. So plenty good for the street. I'm definitely going to run 93 octane just because, you know, it's got to be better than the 87 stuff out there. It says I'll have a 370.78 displacement. I'm not going to walk around calling it a 371. That's kind of silly. It's still a 360 to me, but I just thought I'd show you that and how to get to it. I'll put a link up for these pistons, and thank y'all for watching.